There's a mantra that I've been thinking about lately, and that's location, location, location. Speaking in terms of the filmic, that age-old adage rings true more often than people might think. There are movies out there that would have gone completely forgotten or been seen as otherwise mediocre if not for their location, setting, or sets. But that's not quite what I want to talk about today. I'm thinking a little smaller, if I'm going to be honest. It takes a special kind of talent, or lack of money, to set your film in one single location and have it still work effectively. In a medium where your story can globetrot or even hop, skip, and or jump across different timelines, planets, or dimensions, how can someone compete when theirs only has one backdrop? Well, plenty of ways, each with varying strengths and weaknesses. But much like basically everything else, it all comes down to execution. Let's take a good wandering look at films that either critically, financially, or just artistically use one single location well enough for it to be a major part of the film's identity. Just one tiny caveat about these films. I do not literally mean that every frame of film shot has to be in one place and nowhere else. There can be flashbacks. There can be cutaways. Put simply, the main conflict and setting of the film just has to be focused in or around one location. Okay? Okay. So where to start? Maybe with the old. As far back as the 1920s, you had French pieces like The Passion of the Joan of Arc that used a single set, the most expensive set ever built at the time, for heavy dramatic effect. But on the other side of that coin, you have releases as modern as 2017 with the likes of Gerald's Game, which makes clever use of a singular bedroom in showing a woman's descent into starvation and near madness. But no. The best starting point lies in the middle. In the time when this new subgenre of filmmaking hit its stride by efficiently and consistently tapping into an even older medium, the stage play. Any non-musical play worth its salt had a tight narrative, well-defined characters, and an economy of locations that, when translated on screen, became a manageably low-budget picture. It was a perfect fit, a win-win. I feel that I'd be remiss to not shout out Hitchcock, as he really truly popularized and made sport of the style when he adapted the likes of Dial M for Murder, Rope, and Rear Window into cinematic art. But there's another of these stage-to-screen transitions by yet another famous director that I want to highlight. A true artist's genuinely quality example of how to use one setting to benefit the story told as well as the budget. 12 Angry Men, directed by Sidney Lumet, or Lumet if you want to get phonetic about it. The film follows a gridlocked jury in the 1950s who are tasked with deciding the fate of a troubled ethnic youth accused of stabbing and killing his own father. It appears to be an open and shut case, but one brave juror dares to ask the others to question the reasonable doubt of the prosecution, and from there, it spirals into an ethical and personal debate amongst the whole jury. Director Lumet really brings a level of intensity to it all, through the direction of the actors, the camera, and the clever on-screen passage of time. We see the debate and the summer heat take a physical toll on the jurors, seeing them sweat, pace, and slowly strip away their ties and coats, symbolizing a breakdown of their repressed propriety in favor of raw honesty.
Oh, brilliant.
Through lighting and lens choice, we see this one room go from a bright and official space to a dim and grim proverbial hot seat that forces our characters to ask themselves and each other the hard questions.
Kill him, Alex! Kill him!
You don't really mean you'll kill me, do you?
Also under the guidance of something of an auteur director, Clerks, written and directed by Kevin Smith, showcases a different brand of utilizing one location for your film. Okay, yeah, I'm being a little facetious, but in order to see this topic through the modern lens, Clerks is required reading. On the surface, it's a film about a pair of lazy store clerks who'd rather do anything besides their job. Beyond that, though, it's about stagnation in life and the frustration that comes from that.
But that's the way things are. They're not gonna change.
Make them change.
I can't, all right? Jeez.
It's about being in your 20s, but feeling like your life is already behind you. But mostly, it's about bullshit. And I mean that in the most loving way.
Salsa shark.
This film is about bullshit. All the bullshit that a frustrated, stagnant 20-something working a job that he hates would overanalyze and talk about with a friend on equal footing. Clerks proved that your movie can look like grainy hell, have amateur actors and cheap rented equipment, and still work if you have something personal to say and know how to say it. as well as have the right place to say it. For a budget of only
$27,575.
all out of pocket or credit cards, the film was a mind-blowing success and a major game changer with the youth and up-and-coming indie filmmakers. A 20-something college dropout from New Jersey sits on his ass in a convenience store all day, then shoots his film about sitting on his ass in that same convenience store all night. That's the ultimate punk rock Gen X success story right there. On that same punk rock Gen X Weinstein Company in the 90s note, Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs comes swiftly to mind. Much like Clerks, it's a film about 90s disillusionment and talking about, what else, a whole lot of nothing. Although, being fair, Reservoir Dogs has a lot more of a formal plot than Clerks does. It's a crime drama, mostly. It's almost more of a black comedy. It's a heist movie, mostly. It's without the on-screen heist. It's an odd duck, but that's why it stands out. Reservoir Dogs is a crime thriller focused solely on the before and the after, of characters talking about what they're going to do and then what they did, which was ingenious for style and budget. If you can't outdo the big guys, scale back. Work smarter, not harder, and that's just what Quentin did. But he's recently proven that he wants to keep flirting with this idea of humble, play-like films, regardless of his successes or budget. The Hateful Eight, his most recent work, is in essence a polished, big-budget Western second attempt at Reservoir Dogs. A group of horrible scoundrels are trapped in a single locale with one another, a haberdashery if you were wondering where, and have long, brilliantly expository or character-building conversations about everything and nothing while trying to figure out who to trust and who to backshoot. Quentin makes a few bold technical choices in this one that he wasn't talented or well-equipped enough to pull off with Reservoir Dogs, such as using wide enough lenses to keep the entire cast in one giant frame even when they're nowhere near each other, using a lot of split focus, or just racking back and forth between characters across the room from one another, rather than that gritty, handheld shooting style employed in Reservoir Dogs. It's honestly a little encouraging to see someone as respected and well-loved as Tarantino dial back in scale to the formula that got him his cinematic start, especially after seeing his imagination run wild and free across the American West in Django, or across the entire globe in Kill Bill. The John Hughes classic The Breakfast Club very cleverly uses its setting, a high school, to immediately drum up familiarity and understanding from the audience. Everything from the annoyingly quiet library to the hallways devoid of color aside from the uniform lockers. Almost anyone who watches this movie is going to connect with its visuals of a drab, boring, realistic high school in some way. This familiarity helps to accentuate the kid's plight against Principal Dick and the system of patronizing adults that he represents. But that same familiarity also gives us hope for them, and adds moments of exaggerated escapism. Sure, everyone has seen a school like this one, but not with a bookshelf shoved in a broken doorframe, not with a dance party in the library, or that 70s show-style pot circle. The down-to-earth setting draws us into the world, but the oddball way the kids express themselves in that world, for the sake of their sanity and freedoms, subverts our familiarity in an ingenious way. A few honorable mentions regarding this familiar style go to Misery and The Mist, both based on Stephen King stories. This duo use a cozy house and supermarket respectively, each to greatly variable but equally horrific effect. Die Hard stands as a loose example of this genre that few would even think about, but our expectations are subverted and our nerves are tested throughout as we see the single location of a modern office building used and abused in creative and adventurous ways. Even jumping back to Sidney Lumet for a second, it's hard not to bring up Dog Day Afternoon, which is carried 50-50 on the shoulders of a method-acting Al Pacino and an unassuming bank set that becomes the subject of the film's mad media circus. Completely flipping the script away from the familiar are the films that use their single settings to show you something alien, something completely off-key from comforting norms. Cube and John Carpenter's The Thing both achieve a level of paranoia and dread that file its characters down to the absolute breaking point. Cube takes the single setting thing more literally than most and not only traps its characters in a creepy maze-like structure, but achieves this through the use of only one set. This brilliant design choice to have the different rooms of the cube look virtually identical to one another allowed the filmmakers to just color, light, and decorate as needed for each of the many rooms that we see on screen. The rest relies mostly on montages, wide-angle close-ups, and a whole lot of paranoid yelling.
Let him go, you Nazi!
But it's still a noble indie effort and a competent example of this subgenre. John Carpenter's 82 version of The Thing is a bit more elaborate in its set design, creating a whole Antarctic research base, but achieves even greater levels of tension within. There's something so dreadful about being in a wide open expanse that provides you absolutely no freedom. In fact, it's somehow more damning and encapsulating for it. Between the sub-zero temperatures and the vast stretches of nothingness surrounding the base, the characters might as well be on the moon, they're so isolated, and they have to suffer through a hellish game of who's human with a shape-shifting alien creature.
I know I'm human. And if you were all these things, then you'd just attack me right now. So some of you are still human.
Over the course of the film, any semblance of recognizability that we may have clung to in their homey rec room or the cozy dorms that the men live in is burned away, stripping the set down to the bare ice, just as the men too are whittled down to their cores. In both of these cases, the setting is not only somewhere inarguably alien, to the point of throwing off our sense of reality, but is itself a threat to our characters. The cube maze is lethal, and has rules and formulas to study and learn, seeming almost alive in the way it shifts and changes. And the bitter, windswept, inverted hellscape of the Thing is dangerous enough to keep both men and monster trapped together.
Nobody trusts anybody now. We're all very tired.
We've talked about plays put to screen, novels given new life in a new medium, and movies built from the ground up to be economical. Just like how we began though, the best way to wrap this all up seems to be to scale back our way of thinking. Think micro, not macro. Specifically, not categorically. The example that we'll leave off on is what I consider to be one of the purest entries ever made into the subgenre. 10 Cloverfield Lane. Incredibly truncated recap for the sake of context. Mary Elizabeth Winstead is saved from a car crash by John Goodman and is brought to his subterranean doomsday bunker. After a lot of tension and where the hell am I-ing, the three of them, there's a third guy down there, have to deal with one another and parse out what's really going on topside. Ignoring the decently divisive nature of the film's final act, and whether or not it shares any flesh and blood connection with the '08 Cloverfield, it doesn't, this film stands completely on its own 2 feet as a humble little masterwork of captivating setup, airtight scripting, and brilliant performances.
I accept your apology.
But the merits don't end there. Any praises that can be sung of the rest of the films covered in this essay can in some way be applied here. Example, number 1, it has a solid play-like structure carried largely by the setting or set and the dialogue. Number 2, said dialogue is extremely polished and telling, informing character arcs and backstory very organically. Number 3, the production design of the bunker is deceptively familiar, but the way it's framed and staged, as well as the true surreality of the story itself, subverts and dashes that familiarity and all of our expectations by the time the credits roll. And there's so much more. 10 Cloverfield Lane doesn't just happen to be shot in a basement for the sake of dollars. It's filmed in a carefully constructed bunker, both within and without the fiction. 10 Cloverfield Lane isn't an incidental or debatable entry into the subgenre. It's entirely and strongly defined by its confined nature. It would not and could not be as effective or distinctive if not for its isolation. It's a pitch-perfect example of this variety of film and deserves to be recognized as one of the greats within it. I was initially going to say that this subgenre gets a lot of flack from people, but upon reflection, I really can't say that, because to do so, that would mean that people acknowledge it exists more often. It seems to rarely even be thought of, but when it is, there's a slight dismissive stigma against it. One that leads many to either think that these type of movies are a strategy done by cheap indies to skimp on costs, or a gimmick done by auteurs to appear clever or minimalistic. But it's so much, for lack of a better term, bigger than that. Maybe defining this style of filmmaking as a subgenre conjures up too rigid of a framework to fit it into, too specific expectations. Maybe it would be better to think of it as simply another way to tell a story. All that any single location film really ends up being is a sometimes effective, usually humble, and always subtly ambitious approach to any story that can be told in just one place. Which really does end up being quite a few, if you use your imagination.